My paranormal experiences have been a constant my whole life. My name is Christopher Cabrera, and I've had paranormal experiences essentially my whole life. Initially, the word paranormal wasn't in my lexicon. In 1973, I was born in New York City, and paranormal wasn't in my lexicon. I didn't know what paranormal was. Grew up in a pseudo-Christian Catholic household, so anything that was weird or unnatural, we didn't use the word paranormal. It was either demonic or, it was just like some sort of monster. So, as a kid growing up, I'm the second at that time of two kids. I have an older sister at the time. And I remember as a child seeing things at night moving, about in the room or just in the apartment that we were living at. At the time, we were living in the Bronx. And this is like late 70s, early 80s, because, I was born in 73, but I don't remember a lot of the things until after probably 6 or 7 years old. So at that time in New York, the economy was crappy. We were going through a recession, and specifically the borough of the Bronx just looked like a war-torn city. And so it was really a lot about survival. And I saw a lot of things that I probably shouldn't have seen. Plus, not to get too personal, but my upbringing wasn't the greatest. I grew up in an abusive household. So there was a lot of tension, a lot of negativity in the air. So I would rely on my sister. She was the older one, and she was thrust forward to be sort of like a mother figure to me, and then eventually my younger brother. But I would just remember seeing things just coming in and out of the closet. And I know that, from being a fan or being interested in the paranormal itself, they call them shadow beings. But for me, they weren't shadow beings because they didn't always take the form of a human. They would take on these sometimes anomalous shapes, and they would do these really weird things. A lot of times, darting in and out of the closet. But they would take on these weird shapes, and I liken it to someone throwing the darkest, blackest paint on the wall, and it's splattering, right? And then it would move. And I didn't worry about it because it wasn't something where it would come at me, whatever these things were, again, not having knowledge of them, they wouldn't come at me or try to harm me or anything. And I don't even think they even try to scare me per se, but they would just be there sometimes. Sometimes they would come across as just watching me, observing me. And then other times they would just move about the room, like I said, darting in and out of the closet, under the bed. And so that's really what starts off, my life dealing with paranormal, So dealing with that and dealing with the divorce between my mother and my father, added tension. And I don't know if that kind of sparked something or if it just made me some sort of beacon for these weird things to happen to me. So, paranormal is a kind of a funny word. When I first heard the word paranormal, it was always associated with ghosts and spirits, maybe demons. But as I got older and I started getting into the topic more, or what they would call the subgenres like ufology and cryptozoology, I started to realize that paranormal in reality is an umbrella term, and these other sort of subgenres, are under that, and everything's all connected, and that's including near-death experiences, which isn't normal. You're talking about certain crimes that are not normal, like serial killers, presidents getting assassinated is not a normal thing. So conspiracy theory, definitely paranormal. So when I started to kind of get a grip of all that, then I started to realize that, I'm having quote unquote paranormal experiences. So other than the shadow people being a constant in my life, the next incident that I could remember off the top of my head when I was a child, this is maybe a year or two after my brother was born, my younger brother. My mother remarried. So I went from a divorce to, my mother remarrying and having a stepfather, and in all honesty, wasn't the greatest person, very abusive and involved in some things that weren't great. So again, I think that also added to the situation. So it's nothing but like constant negativity and seeing violence and tons of like verbal abuse and physical abuse, and just really just like the city having this thickness of negativity constantly, you know? So again, we were still in the Bronx at the time. I was probably like around 5 to 6 years old. So that would put my brother like at 2 years old, maybe 3. Um, and so we were in this apartment, and I remember just having issues where I would go to sleep and then wake up, but I couldn't move. And it's this thing that they call paralytic sleep. And I know that medically they try to write it off as just, when you're dealing with stress or some other things. But for me, it wasn't that. This was, to me, something that was like, there was intent behind it. And initially, I didn't know what it was until I started seeing these beings. And what I mean by beings, they were not like the shadow beings. These were like smaller beings, probably at the time, like I said, I'm 5 to 6 years old. They were probably like half my height, you know? And I would see them in the corner of the room. Now, the way that I would lay down, I wouldn't lay down facing, let's say, a wall. I would lay down the other way where I can see most of the room. Even in my peripheral vision, I could see most of the room. And so like I would wake up, was able to open up my eyes. So I was conscious, wasn't dreaming, but I couldn't move. And I could only move my eyes to see around the room. Now, I said I had a younger brother, so he was a baby at the time. And just to go into a little bit more explanation and more context, I had an older sister, and she would sleep in the room with us, but not all the time. Because she was older, she was allowed to stay up later. So since I had school the next day, and my brother, as a baby, they would put both of us to bed at a specific time. Now my sister, would break the rules and stay up a little bit later. And sometimes, felt like she already had like a plan to kind of like stay up late, because she would take her pillow and a blanket with her while she's sitting on the couch watching TV. And a lot of times she would just pass out there. And so it would just be me and my brother in the room, or sometimes me by myself, because sometimes my mother and my stepfather would take my brother into the room with them, especially like if he was antsy and he was crying too much. So this was one instance where he's in the room with me and I can see his crib in front of me. I can't move. And then I'm kind of scanning the room. And I want to say this happened probably pre-dawn. So it's just when the sun's about to come up. I see these beings floating, right? I can't see two of them, and they're in a formation. So to kind of like make it like easier to digest, they're floating in the corner of the room. They're in a triangle sort of formation, meaning you have one in the middle that's not really close to me. He's just the closest. And I know I'm saying he, I don't know if it was a he or a she, just this thing that's floating there that's closer to me. And then the other two on each side of this one that's in the middle. For some reason, I couldn't focus on the other two. I just knew they were there. So they were kind of like blurry. But the one in the middle, I felt like it wanted me to focus on it. Now, this is where it gets strange. And I know the word strange, on a show about paranormal doesn't make sense, but this is strange. And I laugh when I even talk about it because it sounds silly. But the middle one looked like Captain Crunch, the character from the cereal. Okay. The only difference is that it looked sort of like a muted version of Captain Crunch, meaning I was a fan of like the cereal only because I'm into like colors. I'm an artist. So I've loved art my whole life, and I love colors. I love particularly vibrant colors. So Captain Crunch, the commercials and the cereal box were always like vibrant colors, reds and blues and yellows. And his outfit has those colors, blue and yellow. And he has like a white sort of like mustache. But this being, I don't know, but it seemed like it was trying to mimic Captain Crunch. like it had the colors, but those colors were muted. So it was like a muted yellow, and it was a muted blue, and it didn't look crisp like the character. It looked kind of like if you took a plastic toy and you kind of melted it a little bit. It just wasn't crisp and clear. Okay, now I'm again a person of context, so fast forward a few years. Okay, like 99, almost 2000. Well, actually, it's probably, be honest, probably like 2002, right before I got out of the military. Steven Spielberg, he released this mini series on the Sci-Fi Channel called Taken, and the first episode really like got me because it's a scene where the father is putting the son to sleep, and the father leaves and the lights are off in the room. And then all of a sudden a light shines in from the outside into the bedroom. Now the kid's gesture or the look on this child's face, it seemed like he was familiar with that. Like he was almost expecting that. So this character comes in through the window, and I don't know if it's some sort of animal. I don't know if it was a rabbit or a squirrel. I believe it was a squirrel. But the squirrel doesn't say any words. It just gestures to the child to come, right, to follow it. So then the next scene is they're outside, and the squirrel is kind of leaning up against this tree that has a door on it, and it beckons the kid to go inside the door. So the kid goes inside the door closes, and well, the door closes or opens, I don't remember, but I just know that the character, the squirrel animation or 3D animated character, breaks the fourth wall, winks at the TV screen, it's breaking the fourth wall, and it goes inside this treehouse. But the treehouse then transforms into a UFO and it takes off. So to me, that's an abduction scenario. You hear that all the time. If you're into the paranormal and ufology and abductions, many people talk about that. But it's the character that this kid was familiar with that got me. And it brought me back to when I had that incident. Whatever this thing was or these things were, they were trying to project to me something that I was familiar with, I guess maybe so that I didn't get scared. And so this was one incident that happened. And let me describe like what would happen, which wasn't a lot, to be honest. They would just float there, and the one in the middle would do tricks, like sort of like flips in the air. And then I would pass out and then wake up when the sun's out. And then, I would think it was a dream. I never really talked too much about it with my mother because she was too preoccupied, with her own life and, the relationship and just trying to survive. I didn't really bring it up to my sister, but other things would happen, right, in that same apartment. For instance, I would go to sleep in the bedroom, and then I would wake up in the living room on the couch in the morning. Didn't know how I got there. I don't remember getting up to, let's say, use the restroom and then go into the living room to, let's say, watch TV or something. But the weirder thing about it was my pajama shirt would be turned inside out. And I remember my mother like scolding me for doing that, for putting my shirt on backwards. But that's not the case. I remember I would put it on correctly. Or before I went to bed, my sister would tell me, hey, you need to switch your shirt. It's, it's inside out. So those sorts of things would happen. And then we moved from that apartment, and then the incident with the three beings stopped. So the length of how long that happened was probably, 6 months to maybe a year that would happen with no answers. So that's like one incident. And then again, the constant, constantly seeing these shadow things all the time. To backtrack a little bit, also in that apartment, this one incident happened, and it's something that I hear all the time. I'm familiar with because I hear it all the time in other people's encounters. Went to sleep in the bedroom, again, woke up in the living room, not knowing how I got there. This was around Christmas time. My mother would never turn off the tree at nighttime because she liked to see the lights at night, the Christmas tree, and it was in the living room. And so you had the Christmas tree, and then next to the Christmas tree, you had like a little like sort of banister, and then we had like a table with our TV on it, you know, and then across from that would be the couch. So you sit down, you watch the TV, and the tree would be right next to it. So I remember waking up one morning and not knowing how I got to the living room and seeing something like manifest next to the tree. And it's what they call the shimmer sort of being, or the shimmer man, or the glimmer man. And it's very similar to like the Predator from the movie The Predator, how he kind of camouflages and he sort of reflects or absorbs, the environment around him, where you can kind of see through, but something's there. And I remember seeing that in the morning, something manifest itself and then all of a sudden like disappearing right next to the tree. So the beginning of my life pretty much is just, constant negativity, abuse, and then these paranormal things, And I wasn't always a good student in school because of all these things on top of all these things that I had to deal with, So I'm going to fast forward a little bit to my first UFO sighting, still in the 80s. My mom, divorced with my father. So my father had, certain privileges where he could see me and my sister. Okay. Again, my younger brother comes from a different father. So that's, for context. So one day my sister had something to do with friends of hers. She wound up going and do something with her friends. And so my dad decided to just pick me up and to spend some time with him. So this was probably like mid 80s, I want to say, probably like 86, 87. And I was like preteen at that time. And so I used to collect action figures, and I had this sort of like leather bag I used to put all my action figures in, and I used to take them everywhere with me, specifically when I went with my dad, because a lot of times my dad would just plop me in front of a TV and then he'd go and do something like with his car or whatever, not really spend as much time with me as I wanted him to. So I would bring stuff with me to keep me, busy and, let the time fly by until he brought me back home. So anyway, when you enter his apartment, you enter a hallway, and then right away you see the dining room area. And then across from that, you could see the kitchen as soon as you enter. And then there's a wall on your right-hand side. So as soon as you walk in and you pass that wall and you make a right, then you're into the living room, and across you can see the window of the living room. Now, the apartment that he lived in was kind of old. They had renovated it, but they left some of the older stuff, particularly the windows. So they weren't the windows like you would see like now or like in modern times, right? These were the type of windows where it was a panoramic window. You didn't have spaces of wall in between each window. It was just one huge sort of window with like metal sort of bars dividing them. And then the way to open up the window, okay, is that you would have to use this little crank to crank it open and then to crank it closed, right? Whereas like in my apartment, when I was living with my parents, there's a little tab you lift up and then you lift the window up, or there was a lock that was on the top of the window. You unlock it and then you lift the window up. This one was an older one. The cranks were like kind of rusted and everything. Also, that window, there was a windowsill on the inside, and then there was a brick windowsill on the outside of the window. And so this was wintertime and it had snowed. And so there was a buildup of snow on the outside windowsill. So I decided to sit on near that windowsill and then take out my action figures and start playing and using the snow as part of, playing. So this was around like the afternoon. And there used to be this other game that I used to play when I used to sit on this windowsill, is when I used to see aircraft in the air, where there was a helicopter, which was rare, or, planes. I would see them, let's say like on my far right, and I know they're headed toward my left. I would close my eyes and I would try to open it where I think the plane would be. So I would close it for about 2 or 3 minutes and I try to open it to see if I can get exactly pinpointed with my eyes as soon as I open it. Stupid, silly game, but it was something to pass the time. So I remember seeing something dark coming from my right-hand side, and it was moving really fast. and I couldn't really get any details initially. So I started to play that game, and I closed my eyes, and I closed it for probably maybe 20 seconds. And when I opened it, it was farther along than I thought it would be. So it was kind of like almost parallel to me. And when I saw it, it looked literally like if somebody took a knife and they cut a hole in the sky. So you see like the sky and like a hole, and you can almost kind of see through it. And, I described it sort of like a moving portal, because it looked like it was something you can just go into. I didn't see any shade. There was no reflection of the sun. It was like a clear sunny day. There was no like trees blocking the way. It was just a clear sky, and I could see all of the sky from one side to the other. And this thing just took off. Boom, it was gone. So that was like my first UFO sighting. The next incident that I can talk about was when I encountered what most would call a bruja. That's in Spanish, but in English they call it a witch. And witch, carries, different connotations. But, it was one of those instances where this time my father picked up both my sister and I, and we went to some friend's house, some of his friends' houses, or, we went to multiple places, but we wound up in the last spot before he wound up taking us home. His one friend, and they lived in a spot called Co-op City. So if anybody knows what that is, they could look it up. It's in the Bronx, and it's like a neighborhood with a series of like really tall buildings, like talking 75 floors and up. So it's like this concentration of like these apartment buildings, and the only way to get into there is you have to park on the outskirts of this sort of complex. And then you have to walk in and then take the elevator all the way up to whatever floor. And I believe they were probably like on the 20th or 30th floor. But we wound up going there. And when you enter their apartment, there's a small little hallway. And then almost like my dad's apartment, you got the kitchen, and then you got like a living room. And then there's another hallway that leads to some other like bedrooms in there. And when we got there was already other people there. Some of them I recognized as my dad's friends, and some family, and then other people I didn't. And I remember my sister and I, we sat on this like love seat, this like small, like green love seat when you come in. And so we're sitting there and we're watching TV, whatever was on TV. I wasn't really even paying attention, but for some reason, I just started like not feeling well, started getting like this headache. And, for more context, the people that owned or that rented that apartment, it was a husband and a wife. They had 3 dogs. They had like a Doberman, they had a pit bull, and they had like some smaller, really small dog. And when we knocked on the door initially, when we first got there, they barked because that's what most dogs do. But after we came in and they sniffed us, whatever, they were fine. They were calm. They were good to go. So anyway, I started not feeling well. Started getting this headache, and I told my sister, I said, yeah, I'm not feeling well. I got a headache. So she was going to get up to go and see if they had like aspirin or something they can give me. But she got distracted and she wound up not doing it. So, for some reason, I just started to hear noises outside the apartment. Like I heard like some sort of like argument going on, like somebody yelling, and nobody else really like, I didn't feel like anybody else was hearing it, because everybody was focused on watching TV or in their conversations. Nobody paused like I did. I paused to like, kind of like, hey, why am I hearing that? But the dogs, for some reason, started to act up. And at first it was the smaller dog walked past me and went to the front door, and he started to growl a little bit, and then he came back. And then he kept doing this like 3 or 4 times. And then the other dog started to move around. And then I noticed the face of the female that was renting the apartment, the wife. She started to look a little peculiar, and she whispered something to her husband. And so she was speaking in Spanish. Now, I don't speak perfect Spanish. I could pick up certain words. And I wasn't that great when I was younger, but there were certain things that I picked up on. And one of the things was, it's her. That's what I heard, that it's her. She's back. We got to like make sure nobody makes a sound. Right. So I found that peculiar, obviously, like, why can't we make sounds? But I hear like footsteps coming towards the front door, and the dogs just go nuts. They start going crazy, barking. And the husband and the wife are trying to get the dogs to calm down. And then they say something to all of us, like, you guys need to be quiet. There's this person that's in the neighborhood that comes to visit us every once in a while. And if you make noise, she's going to know that we're here in the house, and she's going to want to come in. Now, they refer to her as, they refer to this person as a she, but I'll explain that it wasn't a she. So we're all quiet, and they finally put the dogs in the rooms, but they're still barking for whatever reason. And my head is starting to hurt even more. I'm starting to feel even more and more sick. So finally I hear like this voice. I really don't know how to describe it. It just sounds like a grimy sort of a voice saying stuff in Spanish. And now I know that it was like, let me in. Like, I know you're there. Let me in Spanish. And this person was like knocking on the door, banging on the door, saying, I'm not going to leave until you let me in. So finally, the wife and the husband go to the door, and they start having a conversation with this person. Now, from my vantage point where I was sitting, I can see the hallway to the front door, but I couldn't see the front door. So I couldn't see who was there. And they're pleading with this person to just come back another time because they have guests, and they just, they don't have time to really have a conversation. So this person pushes their way through, and automatically I turn my head to not look at this person. I don't know why I did that. It was some sort of like sixth sense or something, but I turned my head to not look at this person. And my sister looked at this person and grabbed my knee, like squeezed my knee. So I knew it was something that wasn't good. I knew that this situation wasn't a good situation. So this person comes in, and I'm looking at the faces of the other people in the apartment, because I'm not looking up at the person. I'm looking at everybody's expression. They're horrified. So obviously this person doesn't look good at all. And I'm not trying to deal with that. Plus I have a headache and I'm not feeling good. So I put my head down, like I look down towards the floor, and this person starts to walk around the apartment to kind of start having conversations with different people, and they're not paying attention. They're trying to ignore. I can hear some of them say, I don't really want to talk right now. But the voice is just so like, I don't even know how to describe it. Like, it kind of sounds like a joke, but like when you have a woman that smokes a lot, they have that hoarse sort of sound, but it was worse than that. And so I hear this person gesture towards me, like say something, let's say to my sister or somebody that was next to me, like, what's wrong with that kid? Because I'm looking down at the ground and I refuse to look up. Then they go into the kitchen, and I kind of peek up a little bit, and all I could see is like jet black long hair, and this person doesn't look kept at all. Like their clothes are just like messed up. They kind of have like I don't want to say a fur coat, but it looked like somewhat of like a fur coat, and they're kind of limping. So they go into this person goes into the kitchen, and they're, bothering the people in the kitchen. And finally, like my dad, I guess, said something like, just leave us alone, go out, leave. So as this lady's leaving, I get a sort of like a glimpse, and it's literally almost like what you would see a witch, like with, like a mole on the nose and little hairs coming out of it, and the eyes like bloodshot red, really dark skin. And I mean, this was like a fleeting glimpse that I took. And as this person is taking their turn to walk out to hopefully leave, I wind up taking off and going into the kitchen with my dad because in my mind, he was the only one that kind of really stood up. And I felt like, he'll protect me. And I wound up banging like my elbow, like cutting it, like pretty bad. But I was so scared, I didn't feel it at the time. So I went, sat down next to my sister, who, by the way, left me in the chair after this person first came in. Wound up sitting next to my sister in the kitchen, and I just put my head down. And I'm thinking that this lady's going to leave, but she winds up not leaving and coming right back into the kitchen. So I hear her talking some more, and I get this sense that this person wants to touch me or goes to touch me. My sister smacks their hand away and says, "He's not feeling good. Leave him alone." And then ultimately the lady wound up leaving, and you can hear this lady. I mean, it looked like a lady. I don't think it was a person, to be honest, even though it looked flesh and blood. I thought it was a witch, essentially, But as this person is leaving, and you can hear them, slowly going away in the hallway because they're talking and screaming, and it's getting less and less, and they're gone. And about 5 to 10 minutes after the person left, my head went away, and I wasn't feeling that bad. I wound up staying in that kitchen. I wasn't going to go back into the living room. We wound up leaving eventually after about like an hour or so. But the dread that came over me, like, oh, we're leaving, and I know the trek that we have to take to get to the vehicle. What if we run into this person again? And I was scared the whole way going down the elevator and everything. But yeah, that was an incident that happened to me, another paranormal sort of thing that happened to me when I was living in New York. Let's get into like another one of my incidents that happened. Okay, so because of what was going on in my household, the abuse and the negativity, when I got to be a preteen, I would take certain risks that maybe I shouldn't take as a young child. Okay, I learned how to ride the subway system, and I learned from friends, maybe people I shouldn't have even really been hanging out with, but they would show me how to do things like hop the train. And what I mean by hop the train, and this is for people that never lived in New York, when you go through the subway system, you have to have a token. Now you just need like some sort of like card, but back then you had to have a token, and you put the token into the turnstile, and then the turnstile would allow you to go through. Well, if you didn't have a coin and you don't want to pay for it, and you need to get somewhere, you just jump over the turnstile, which was called hop the train, and then you can go and ride the train to wherever you want. The only problem is that they had this group called the MTA, and cops sometimes would be on there, and if you hop the train, and then they would give you a fine. So you had to do it like when you knew that there was no cops there, or there was no roaming MTA, workers working. So I would sneak out of the house at night, and I would meet my friends at the train station. We would hop the train, and we just pretty much run around the whole city. And you're talking about like preteens, teenagers, with no parental guidance, just running around the city, getting into trouble, just trying to, pass time. For me, it was just more just trying to get out of the house and not have to deal with that. So my plan always was like to go have my fun and try to get home before my mother went to work and sneak back into the house. There were times where I would come too late, and I would have to kind of like hide in a corner somewhere on the street and wait for my mother to watch my mother as she left, walked out of the apartment complex, got into the car with my stepfather, and then took off. And then I would go back, I would go upstairs. So this one time I meet up with some friends, and they're like, yeah, we're going to go back to the Bronx, because I was living in Astoria, Queens at the time. So like, yeah, we're going to go back to the Bronx. There's this station platform, this underground platform where there's a bunch of like graffiti art, because I was into the hip hop culture and graffiti, the art of graffiti was, made an impression on me. I would go and look for these pieces and these rare places that not a lot of people were allowed to go to, or you would take a risk to go to these places. And so, if people don't know, New York really, they don't demolish and then rebuild. They build on top of. So when you look at the subway system, like the subway system that exists today, below that is another subway system, and below that is another subway system, but they're decommissioned. And there's ways to go down there and walk and do some exploration. There's things called urban exploration where people actually go down there and they film, the different old subway systems, and things like that. So a bunch of my friends were like, yeah, we found the spot where we can go. So we wound up going to the Bronx, and we walked to the side of this one street, and there's this metal grate, sort of like a box, and there's a lock on it. And so my friend, one of them had a chain cutter or a lock cutter, and he broke the lock. And then he opened it up, and there's a set of stairs that went down. So we start going down, and right off the bat, you can see, graffiti on either side of us going all the way down. So we go down to one floor, and one of my friends pointed out on the other side of this wall is the main entrance to the subway platform, the one that's live. We're in a decommissioned part, but he's like, we can continue to go down. So we continue to go down these stairs, and I would imagine we went down probably 3 or 4 stories down. And so we enter this sort of big open space. There's not a lot of light down there. Some areas have no light, but a couple of the people that we were with, I want to say we were with probably 7 people, including myself. A couple of them had flashlights. But again, you can see nothing but vandalism, graffiti all up on the wall. But you also, the cool part of it is that you see old posters, movie posters from the 60s and 70s. You find offices in there, stations where people, the MTA or the engineers would change, into their gear. You found those locker rooms and things of that sort. You find old newspapers, old comic books. And so we just went exploring in there, and we found the spot where a lot of the major or the known urban artists would do their pieces. And so it was being in a museum, 3 or 4 stories below, the city. So we went, some of them took pictures, and we looked at it, and then we kept exploring a little bit more. And so we got to this area where it was literally pitch black, and it was an old platform. Okay. And so maybe 6 or 7 feet to our right would be the drop off to the train tracks. Okay. So we're all huddled together walking because, we had to be careful. And the 2 individuals were using their flashlight to make sure we didn't walk over the edge, because, you go over the edge, we don't know what's down there. This is, polluted water, you can get cut, you could hurt yourself. And then, there's no way that the EMT or, ambulance is going to be able to go down there and grab you. You're pretty much in a world of hurt if you get hurt down there. So anyway, we're there, and we're just about getting ready to leave because it was nothing. It was pitch black, and it was kind of, the daytime was about to hit soon. It was about to be dawn. And my friend, one of my friends was like, "What is that?" And so we look. Now, mind you, if you've been to New York and you've seen the subway platform and you jump down into the train tracks, I want to say that platform is probably 4 feet high, right? It's about 4 feet high. So if somebody falls in, and you're at least 5 foot or taller, you're good. You can just jump right back onto the platform if a train is coming. And you see that all the time. People make mistakes and they slip and they fall in there, or sometimes you got bad people that'll push people in there, and others will go in and to help. If you're less than 4 feet, if you're a little kid, you're in trouble. So anyway, we see something coming out of the tunnel, and all we see is a pair of yellow eyes, and they're not low to the ground. So meaning it's not on the platform with us. It's down into the train track area, and it's above the platform, these eyes. So whatever it was pretty tall, but we didn't waste no time. We just all ran out of there, but it was coming towards us, whatever it was. It stopped, and it was looking at us, and my friends were shining the flashlight, and you could see, what they call eye shine, but we got out of there. So that was, another incident that happened. Trying to think of something else. On my way back, I guess this classifies as sort of paranormal because it's not normal, but on my way back home, when I got in my neighborhood area, I had this feeling that I was being followed. And I always have this sort of like sixth sense when somebody's watching or looking at me, or if I'm being followed. And I for sure knew somebody was following me. So as I'm walking home and I'm walking down one of these streets, a street that I normally take a shortcut, I wound up looking back and I didn't see anything. And then I continued to walk, and then I turned real quick and I saw somebody jump behind a car. And so I knew I was being followed. So then I start running, and then I hear somebody running as well. I turn around, and it's this older man, chasing after me. And I knew that it wasn't going to be a good scenario if this person caught me. But I wound up like running and jumping through some shortcuts, jumping some fences, and I wound up making it home. But that was, that same night that I saw that eye shine. Another incident would be what I call the serial criminals or the serial killer incident. I know it sounds crazy, but it's something that happened to me. I don't know how to explain how and why, but anyway, months leading up to this incident, there was a series of crimes that were being committed by an individual or individuals. They think it was initially one individual that committed a crime and got away with it, and so others started to copycat. Or it was a group of people that were committing crimes. But the scenario would be that a person or persons would enter like an apartment complex. They would knock on someone's door and put their thumb over the peephole. And so when somebody would come and answer the door and they would look through the peephole, they couldn't see anything. Now, common sense would say you don't open the door, but some people unfortunately didn't have common sense. They would open the door and they would get assaulted, and then sometimes there was murder involved. And this was something that went on for months. Another characteristic of this crime that was going on was when people didn't open the door, they would get on their hands and knees and look under the door to see the person's foot, and they would see someone wearing what they called jelly sandals, or I don't know what they call them now, but back then they called them like jelly sandals. And mostly females would wear them, especially like little girls or something, or females would wear them, where they were like these sandals that were like plastic sort of, or they were kind of see-through, and they would come in different colors. And so this person or these people would wear that, and they think that it was a tactic to throw off whoever was answering the door, like, oh, it's a female, and they would open it. So that was one of the characteristics. So this went on for a while, off and on. It wasn't like an everyday thing. It was like every other week or every other month, a crime would be committed, and those were the characteristics of witnesses, right? So in New York, at least in the 80s when I was growing up, neighbors would help each other out. And what I mean by that is, like, the grocery store wasn't like across the street or just a few minutes away all the time. Sometimes the grocery store was significantly far. And so if a person, like, let's say my mother ran out of milk, or let's say she wanted to make a cake and she was one egg short or something, we would borrow food or just tools or whatever, just borrow from each other. We'd all look out for each other. The neighbors would do that. So I remember my mom wanting to make something and she needed milk. And so she initially asked me to go downstairs. So we lived on the second floor, right? The apartment complex that I live in, or the area that I live in, was 18th Street in Astoria. And those apartments were only 3 stories, okay? And each story had only 3 apartments. So every sort of wing of the apartment complex had 9 apartments. So 3 stories, 3 apartments per floor. You had your base first floor, which didn't have apartments. It had like a mailbox, and it had a little space for when like UPS delivered big packages and let's say nobody was home. Then you'd have to walk up to the first platform, which was the first floor. Then you so on and so forth. You go upstairs to the second floor. That'd be the second platform, third floor. After the third floor, there was another set of stairs that went to a smaller platform that led to the roof, and there was a door there. Now, generally, that door is supposed to be locked, okay? And there's a light above it, and that light is supposed to work. But apparently, in our building, the door was broken. Don't know if somebody broke it or whatever, and the light wasn't working. So at nighttime, in evening to nighttime, when it would get dark, you couldn't see upstairs from the third floor, right? Whereas like versus the daytime or when there's light out, you can see from the third floor, you can see up and look at the door and see the door. So it was pitch black with no light up there. So my mom asked me to go downstairs to one of the neighbors downstairs and ask for milk. So I went downstairs, asked for milk. They didn't have milk. So I went back upstairs, told my mother, the neighbor downstairs doesn't have any milk. So she was like, okay, we'll try the neighbor upstairs, which is the third floor, and ask for milk. So I went upstairs and I knock on their door. And for some reason, I felt like I was being watched. So I go over to the set of stairs and I look up and I can't see anything because, like I said, it's pitch black up there. But I have this feeling like somebody's there or something is there watching me. So then finally I hear the people in the apartment, coming to the door to open the door, and I go and I ask them if they have milk. So they're like, yeah, wait here for a second. So I wait. Again, that feeling, those chills going down my spine, like something's watching me and wanting to get done with it. They come back, they give me the glass of milk, and then I wind up going back downstairs and giving it to my mother. So then about 2 hours later, I see cops pulling up to the apartment complex, and I can hear them going upstairs. They pass my floor and they go up to the third floor. And then they're there for about like an hour, hour and a half. And then finally they leave. And my mother went upstairs to find out what was going on. And what had happened is the neighbor that I went to, the one on the third floor that gave us the milk, said that after I left about like 5 minutes, somebody knocked on their door. When they went to look through the peephole was covered. Okay. And then they went on their hands and knees to look under, and they saw a person wearing jelly flip-flops. And they knew about the crimes that were going on. And so they immediately called the cops. And whoever this person was, or if it was one person or more people, wound up leaving. So potentially I was in a situation where I had a criminal or some sort of killer looking at me from the roof. And so, yeah, that's another incident. And I'll hit you with the last one, that happened, while I was living in New York, because, there's more incidents throughout my life and there's too many. But right before I left New York, my brother and I were in the house by ourselves because my mother and my stepfather just wanted time for themselves. And I was old enough where I could look after my younger brother. My sister at this time, she already had moved out and was living on her own. So my mom and my stepfather wound up leaving. And so we're there, we're hanging out. And the only rule that my mother had was make sure you both are in bed by 10 o'clock. We don't want to come home and see you guys up. So we were like, fine, no problem. So we're playing video games, we're having fun, watching movies, whatever. And then it gets late. And so we decide, all right, we're going to kind of go to sleep, but not really. So what we're going to do is we're going to build sort of a fort with pillows and blankets. And we're going to be inside the fort. And we had the old school, this is before Nintendos and all of that, we had this handheld video game, that you needed batteries for it to work. And we were going to play that while we were lying underneath this fort. And so, it's late at night. It's probably 9:30 or so at night. And we can hear the ambient sounds of just our neighborhood, the crickets and, maybe we could hear sort of the fridge, and all that. But all of a sudden, it went dead. There was no sound all of a sudden. Even the video game that my brother and I were playing, stopped making noise. And there was this pause. And then all of a sudden, something touches the blanket, but it touches it in a way where you can see the print of it. And we saw these 3 fingers kind of touch the blanket and kind of like scrape it, going up and down. And so both of us wind up flipping. We literally started flipping out, screaming. We throw the blankets off, and there's nothing in the room with us. And it got us so scared that we turned on all the lights in the house. We looked under every crevice, every closet, everything, and there was nothing there. And then lo and behold, my mother gets home and she sees us up and we wind up getting in trouble. But yeah, that pretty much sums up most of like my paranormal experiences.
If you've had a paranormal experience and would like to be a guest on the show, please contact us by going to myparax.com. That's myparaex.com. Thanks for listening.